The rain hammered against the cracked pavement of downtown Chicago as Vanessa clutched her 6-month-old daughter closer to her chest. The cardboard sign she'd been holding had dissolved into mush, and her last $5 had bought nothing more than a bottle of formula that morning. When she saw the sleek black Mercedes with its door slightly ajar, engine running, she made a split-second decision that would change everything. What she didn't know was that the man behind the wheel wasn't just any businessman. He was Marcus Wellington, CEO of Wellington Industries, worth over $2 billion. And what happened next would shock everyone, including herself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other for the past 3 months. Vanessa woke up on the thin mattress in the corner of the abandoned warehouse she'd been calling home, her baby daughter Emma stirring in the makeshift crib she'd constructed from cardboard boxes and old blankets. The October chill had crept through the broken windows during the night, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the dim light filtering through the grimy glass. At 22, Vanessa had never imagined her life would take such a devastating turn. Just 8 months ago, she'd been working 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and serving tables during the day, while living in a modest apartment on the south side of Chicago. She'd been saving every penny for Emma's arrival, dreaming of the nursery she'd paint in soft yellows and greens, the tiny clothes she'd fold neatly in drawers, the future she'd build for her daughter. But life had other plans. The restaurant where she worked suddenly closed without warning, leaving her without her primary source of income. Then Emma arrived 6 weeks early, requiring an extended hospital stay that depleted her savings and left her drowning in medical bills. The final blow came when her landlord, Mr. Peterson, decided to renovate the building and evicted all tenants with just 30 days' notice. With no family to turn to and her credit destroyed by mounting debts, Vanessa found herself on the streets with a newborn baby. The warehouse had been her sanctuary for 3 months now. It was scheduled for demolition, which meant it was empty and forgotten, perfect for someone who needed to remain invisible. She'd learned to navigate the city's shelter system, but with Emma, it was complicated. The family shelters had waiting list months long, and the emergency shelters were often unsafe, overcrowded, and temporary solutions at best. This particular Tuesday morning, Emma was fussier than usual. Her formula supply was running dangerously low, and Vanessa knew she'd have to venture out into the city to find work or assistance. She gathered their few belongings, a diaper bag she'd received from a charity, 2 changes of clothes for Emma, a water bottle, and the remains of a granola bar, and prepared for another day of uncertainty. The rain started as she stepped outside, a light drizzle that quickly intensified into a steady downpour. Vanessa pulled her thin jacket tighter around Emma, using her own body as a shield against the weather. The baby's cries grew louder, cutting through the sound of traffic and rain, drawing unwanted attention from passers-by who either stared with pity or deliberately looked away. She walked for hours through the downtown streets, stopping at various businesses to ask about work opportunities. Most managers took one look at her, a young woman with a baby, clothes that hadn't been properly washed in days, exhaustion written across her face, and politely declined before she could even finish explaining her situation. A few were kinder, offering her a meal or a few dollars, but no one had actual employment to offer. By mid-afternoon, Emma was inconsolable. The rain had soaked through Vanessa's jacket, and she was shivering uncontrollably. She needed to find shelter, somewhere to feed and change Emma, somewhere to collect herself and figure out their next move. The public library had been her usual refuge, but they'd banned her the previous week after other patrons complained about Emma's crying. During story time, that's when she found herself on Michigan Avenue in the heart of Chicago's business district. The contrast was stark. Gleaming office buildings reaching toward the grey sky, well-dressed professionals hurrying between meetings, expensive cars navigating the congested streets. She felt invisible among the wealth and power, just another problem society preferred to ignore. She ducked into the covered entrance of a luxury hotel, hoping to escape the rain for a few minutes. The doorman, dressed in an elaborate uniform with gold braiding, immediately approached her with a stern expression. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move along," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to removing unwanted visitors. "Please, I just need a moment to calm my baby," Vanessa pleaded, rocking Emma gently. "She's cold and hungry and I understand your situation, but this is private property. There's a shelter about 6 blocks north if you need assistance." Vanessa knew the shelter he was referring to. She'd tried there before. It was always full, with a waiting list that seemed to grow longer each day. But she nodded and stepped back into the rain, Emma's cries now reaching a pitch that made other pedestrians cross the street to avoid them. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of rejection and desperation. Every door she approached seemed to close before she could fully explain her situation. Every kind gesture, a offered umbrella, a concerned smile, felt like a spotlight illuminating her failure as a mother. She began questioning every decision that had led her to this moment, wondering if Emma would be better off in the care system, safe and fed in a warm home, instead of struggling alongside her mother on the unforgiving streets. As evening approached, the business district began to empty. Office workers hurried toward parking garages and train stations, eager to return to their comfortable homes and families. The rain continued its relentless assault, turning the sidewalks into rivers and making visibility poor for both pedestrians and drivers. Vanessa found herself on a quieter side street, lined with upscale restaurants and boutiques that were closing for the day. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, casting long shadows between the buildings. Emma had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from crying, her tiny body warm against Vanessa's chest, despite the cold rain soaking through their clothes. That's when she saw it. The black Mercedes sedan, its engine running, parked outside an exclusive steakhouse called the Capital Club. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, and she could see the warm glow of the interior lights. It was clearly expensive, probably belonging to some wealthy businessman enjoying dinner while his car waited outside with the engine running to keep it warm. For a moment, Vanessa just stared at the vehicle. The rain was coming down harder now, and she was shivering so violently that she was afraid she might drop Emma. Her daughter stirred in her arms, making small whimpering sounds that indicated she was waking up hungry again. Vanessa checked her bag. No formula left, no money to buy more, and nowhere dry to go, even if she had the resources. The decision happened almost without conscious thought. One moment she was standing on the sidewalk, and the next she was moving toward the car. The rain had reduced visibility enough that the few remaining pedestrians were focused on their own journeys, heads down against the weather. She reached the Mercedes and hesitated for just a second before pulling the rear door open and sliding inside with Emma. The warmth hit her immediately, a shocking contrast to the cold rain she'd been enduring for hours. The interior was luxurious beyond anything she'd ever experienced. Leather seats that seemed to embrace her, soft lighting that didn't hurt her tired eyes, and blessed silence, broken only by the gentle hum of the engine and the muffled sound of rain against the windows. Emma opened her eyes and for the first time all day didn't immediately start crying. The warmth seemed to soothe her as much as it did Vanessa. For a few precious moments, they both simply existed in this bubble of comfort, a brief respite from the harsh reality waiting outside. Vanessa knew she couldn't stay long. This wasn't her car, and the owner would return eventually. But for now, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to have this kind of security every day, a warm, dry place to rest, the resources to provide for Emma's needs, the simple dignity of not having to beg for basic necessities. She was so lost in this momentary peace that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching the car, didn't notice the shadow falling across the rain-streaked window. It wasn't until the driver's door opened and someone slid behind the wheel that she realized her mistake. Her heart stopped as she found herself staring at the back of a man's head, his dark hair impeccably styled, his expensive suit indicating exactly the kind of person whose car she'd just illegally entered. The man hadn't noticed her yet. He was focused on his phone, speaking in low, authoritative tones about quarterly projections and merger negotiations. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge, making decisions that affected thousands of people and millions of dollars. Vanessa's mind raced through her options. She could try to slip out quietly, hoping he wouldn't notice until she was gone. She could explain her situation and hope for understanding, or she could remain perfectly still and pray that somehow this wealthy stranger would reach his destination. Without ever turning around, Emma made the decision for her. The baby chose that exact moment to release a small, contented sigh, the kind of sound that might be barely audible under normal circumstances, but seemed to echo through the quiet luxury of the Mercedes like a gunshot. The man's phone conversation stopped mid-sentence. Vanessa watched as he slowly turned around, his reflection visible in the rearview mirror. She found herself looking into the most striking pair of green eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face that was both stern and surprisingly kind. This was clearly a man of power and influence, someone whose time was valuable and whose privacy was sacred. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Vanessa clutched Emma closer, preparing for the anger and accusations she was certain would follow. She'd trespassed, invaded his personal space, brought her problems into his privileged world. She expected him to call security, to have her arrested, to treat her like the criminal she supposed she was. Instead, Marcus Wellington, though she didn't yet know his name, simply looked at her. His gaze took in her soaked clothes, her exhausted face, the baby in her arms, and something in his expression shifted. The initial surprise gave way to something else, something Vanessa couldn't quite identify, but that didn't seem like anger. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry. I just needed... The rain was so cold and my baby..." The words trailed off as she realized how inadequate any explanation would sound. How could she make this successful businessman understand the desperation that had driven her to seek shelter in a stranger's car? How could she explain the bone-deep exhaustion that came from months of struggling to survive on the streets with an infant? Marcus continued to study her, his green eyes unreadable. The silence stretched between them, filled only with the sound of rain against the windows and Emma's soft breathing. Vanessa prepared to gather their belongings and flee into the night, but something in his expression made her hesitate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she'd expected, lacking the harsh judgment she'd braced herself for. "How long have you been out there?" The question hung in the air between them, and Vanessa found herself unable to look away from Marcus's reflection in the mirror. His tone hadn't carried the accusation she'd expected, but rather something that sounded almost like concern. 3 months, she answered honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 months with Emma. Marcus turned fully around in his seat, and she could see his face clearly now. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably in his early 30s, with features that spoke of privilege and education. But there was something in his eyes that surprised her, a depth that suggested he understood struggle in ways that his expensive suit might not immediately reveal. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentle but direct. "Vanessa. Vanessa Torres." She paused, then added, "This is Emma." As if responding to the introduction, Emma opened her eyes and looked directly at Marcus. Instead of crying as she usually did when meeting strangers, the baby simply stared with the intense curiosity that only infants possess. Marcus's expression softened further as he took in the tiny face peeking out from the worn blanket. "Hello, Emma," he said quietly, and something about the way he spoke to her daughter made Vanessa's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. For a moment, Vanessa's heart raced, thinking he was calling the police. Instead, he spoke to someone on the other end with quiet authority. "Cancel my dinner reservation at the Capitol Club. Something's come up." He listened briefly, then added, "Reschedule the Patterson meeting for tomorrow morning. I'll be unavailable for the rest of the evening." He ended the call and looked back at Vanessa, who was staring at him in confusion. This wasn't how she'd imagined this encounter would unfold. Where was the anger, the demands for explanations, the immediate ejection from his vehicle? "When did Emma last eat?" Marcus asked, and the practical nature of the question caught Vanessa off guard. "This morning. I ran out of formula, and I couldn't—" She stopped, the admission of her failure as a provider burning in her throat. Marcus nodded once, a decisive gesture that seemed to settle something in his mind. He turned back around and put the car in drive, pulling away from the curb with smooth precision. "Where are we going?" Vanessa asked, alarm creeping into her voice despite his apparent kindness. "Somewhere Emma can eat, and you can both get warm," Marcus replied simply. They drove through the city in relative silence, Emma content in the warmth of the car, and Vanessa trying to process this surreal turn of events. Outside, Chicago continued its evening rhythm. Traffic lights cycling through their colors, pedestrians hurrying along sidewalks, the normal flow of urban life that she'd been watching from the margins for months. Marcus navigated the streets with the confidence of someone who knew the city well. They left the downtown core and entered a neighborhood Vanessa recognized as one of the more affluent areas, where tree-lined streets gave way to elegant brownstones and boutique shops that catered to clientele with disposable income. He pulled into the parking lot of a small, upscale grocery store that was still open despite the late hour, the kind of place where organic produce gleamed under perfect lighting, and the staff wore aprons that looked like they'd been pressed that morning. "Wait here," Marcus said, leaving the engine running. "I'll be right back." Vanessa watched through the rain-streaked windows as he disappeared into the store, moving with purpose through the automatic doors. She felt like she was existing in some sort of alternate reality, where wealthy strangers rescued desperate mothers from the rain and asked no questions in return. Emma had fallen asleep again, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. In the warmth and quiet of the Mercedes, Vanessa allowed herself to close her eyes for just a moment. The leather seat seemed to embrace her tired body, and for the first time in months, she felt completely safe. She must have dozed off, because the sound of the car door opening startled her awake. Marcus slid back into the driver's seat, and she could see several bags in his hands from the rearview mirror. "I wasn't sure what kind of formula Emma preferred," he said, turning to show her the contents of one bag. "So I got several varieties, and some baby food, in case she's ready for that. Diapers, wipes, and a few other things." Vanessa stared at the supplies with disbelief. There was easily over $100 worth of baby necessities in those bags, more than she'd been able to provide for Emma in weeks. "I can't accept this," she said automatically, though every fiber of her being wanted to reach for those supplies. "Emma needs to eat," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "Accepting help for your daughter isn't the same as accepting charity for yourself." The distinction he made was subtle but important, and it told Vanessa that he understood something about pride and dignity that many people in his position might not grasp. They drove for another 15 minutes, eventually pulling into the circular driveway of a hotel that looked like it had been transplanted from European royalty. The Meridian Grand was the kind of establishment where rooms cost more per night than most people made in a week, and where the staff were trained to anticipate needs before they were expressed. "Mr. Wellington," the valet said as Marcus stepped out of the car, immediately moving to take his keys. "Shall I have your usual suite prepared? Actually, I'll need 2 adjoining rooms tonight, James. Make sure one is equipped for an infant, crib, bottle warmer, whatever might be needed." Vanessa heard this exchange as she carefully extracted herself from the back seat with Emma, and she realized she was about to enter a world she'd only ever seen in movies. The hotel's lobby was a study in understated elegance, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, with staff members who moved like dancers, performing a carefully choreographed routine. "Mr. Wellington," the desk manager approached with the kind of deference reserved for very important guests. "Everything will be ready within minutes. Is there anything else you require?" "Have room service prepare a selection of nutritious meals. For the lady," Marcus said, gesturing toward Vanessa, "and please have Dr. Reeves come up when convenient. I'd like him to examine the baby just to ensure she's healthy." Vanessa started to protest. She couldn't possibly afford a doctor's visit, let alone a stay at this hotel, but Marcus held up a gentle hand. "Emma should be seen by a physician," he said quietly. "It's been 3 months on the streets. Quick checkup will give you peace of mind." The elevator ride to the 15th floor passed in a blur of polished brass and soft music. Vanessa caught glimpses of herself in the mirrored walls and was shocked by what she saw. Her clothes were still damp from the rain, her hair hung in limp strands around her face, and exhaustion had carved deep shadows under her eyes. She looked exactly like what she was, a homeless woman who'd been struggling to survive. The suite Marcus led her to was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. But it was the adjoining room that took her breath away, a fully equipped nursery that had been prepared with the efficiency that only unlimited resources could provide. "The staff here are very capable," Marcus explained, noting her amazement. "I've used this hotel for business entertaining, and they're accustomed to unusual requests." Emma was fully awake now, looking around at her new surroundings with wide eyes. The warm, clean environment seemed to energize her, and she made the kind of happy gurgling sounds that Vanessa hadn't heard from her daughter in weeks. Marcus had opened one of the formula containers and was reading the preparation instructions with the careful attention of someone tackling an unfamiliar but important task. Watching him, this clearly powerful businessman, studying baby formula directions with complete seriousness was perhaps the most surreal moment in an already impossible day. "I should probably handle that," Vanessa said, moving toward him. "Of course, I just wanted to understand the process." He handed her the container and stepped back, giving her space to work. As Vanessa prepared Emma's bottle, using the bottle warmer that had appeared as if by magic, she became aware that Marcus was watching her with careful attention, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but rather as if he was trying to understand something important. "You're very good with her," he observed. "She's my world," Vanessa replied simply, testing the formula temperature on her wrist. "Everything I do is for her." "But you haven't been able to do enough," Marcus said, and the words might have sounded cruel from someone else, but his tone made it clear he was stating a fact, not making a judgment. "No," Vanessa admitted, settling into a plush armchair to feed Emma. "I haven't been able to do enough." Emma latched onto the bottle with an enthusiasm that broke Vanessa's heart. Her daughter had been so hungry, and she'd been unable to provide this most basic need. The guilt that had been her constant companion for months threatened to overwhelm her again. "Tell me how this happened," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. "How does a mother end up on the streets with a baby?" So Vanessa told him. She found herself explaining everything: the job losses, the medical bills, the eviction, the impossible choices that had led her to this point. Marcus listened without interruption, his green eyes never leaving her face, his expression growing more thoughtful as her story unfolded. When she finished, the room fell into silence, broken only by Emma's contented suckling sounds. Marcus sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him, as if he was processing complex business information. "What kind of work did you do before?" he asked finally. "Anything I could find. Restaurant work mostly, some office cleaning. I'm not afraid to work hard. I just need something stable, something that pays enough to cover childcare and rent and—" She trailed off, realizing how desperate she sounded. "What about family? Friends who could help?" Vanessa shook her head. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 19. Emma's father." She paused, the familiar pain of that betrayal still sharp. "He decided he wasn't ready for the responsibility when I told him I was pregnant. I haven't heard from him since." Marcus nodded slowly, and something in his expression suggested this information was being filed away for future consideration. There was a soft knock at the door, and Marcus rose to answer it. A distinguished older man entered, carrying a medical bag and wearing the kind of gentle smile that immediately inspired confidence. "Dr. Reeves," Marcus said, "thank you for coming so quickly. This is Vanessa and her daughter Emma. I'd appreciate it if you could give Emma a thorough examination, just to ensure she's thriving despite some recent challenges." Dr. Reeves was exactly the kind of physician Vanessa had always imagined wealthy people had access to, patient, thorough, and willing to take all the time necessary to ensure his small patient was healthy. He examined Emma with gentle hands and kind words, pronouncing her remarkably well-developed considering the circumstances. "She's a strong little girl," he told Vanessa as he packed up his equipment, "a bit underweight, which is to be expected, but no signs of serious malnutrition or illness. With proper nutrition and care, she should thrive beautifully." After the doctor left, room service arrived with an array of dishes that looked like they belonged in a 5-star restaurant. Vanessa realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten a full meal, and the aroma of the food made her stomach clench with hunger. "Please," Marcus said, gesturing toward the table, "eat." As Vanessa ate, trying to maintain some dignity while simultaneously wanting to devour everything in sight, Marcus excused himself to make a phone call in the next room. She could hear his voice through the door, speaking in the authoritative tones she'd first heard in the car, but she couldn't make out the words. When he returned, Emma was sleeping peacefully in the portable crib that had been provided, and Vanessa was sitting by the window, looking out at the city lights. "I've been thinking about your situation," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside her. Vanessa turned to face him, trying to read his expression. Throughout this entire surreal evening, she'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the moment when his kindness would reveal its price or its limits. "I have a proposition for you," he continued, and Vanessa's heart began to race with possibilities, both hopeful and terrifying. The word proposition hung in the air between them, and Vanessa felt her pulse quicken. In her experience, when wealthy men offered propositions to desperate women, they rarely had pure intentions. She instinctively glanced toward Emma's crib, prepared to protect her daughter from whatever uncomfortable situation might be developing. Marcus seemed to notice her sudden tension, and his expression softened with understanding. "Not that kind of proposition," he said gently. "I'm talking about employment." Vanessa's shoulders relaxed slightly, but wariness remained in her eyes. "What kind of employment?" Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering cityscape below. "My company, Wellington Industries, is expanding rapidly. We're always in need of dedicated people who understand the value of hard work and commitment. I don't have a college degree, Vanessa said quickly. I barely finished high school before my parents died. I'm not qualified for the kind of positions your company probably offers. Qualifications can be taught, Marcus replied, turning back to face her. Character cannot. You've kept yourself and your daughter alive on the streets of Chicago for 3 months. You've maintained your dignity in circumstances that would break most people. You're resourceful, determined, and clearly devoted to your responsibilities. Those are qualifications that matter more than any piece of paper. Vanessa studied his face, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. What exactly are you proposing? Marcus returned to his chair, leaning forward slightly as he spoke. I need someone I can trust in my household, someone to manage my personal affairs, coordinate with domestic staff, handle scheduling and correspondence. The position would come with a competitive salary, full benefits, and housing. You're offering me a job as your personal assistant? Vanessa asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. More than that, I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your life. The position would be demanding. I travel frequently, work long hours, and expect excellence in everything. But it would provide stability for you and Emma. Vanessa felt her heart racing. The offer seemed too good to be true, which in her experience usually meant it was. Why would you do this for a stranger? You don't know anything about me beyond what I've told you tonight. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes reflecting something deeper than simple charity. Because I understand what it means to lose everything, he said finally, and because I believe in second chances. Before Vanessa could respond, Marcus continued, I wasn't always wealthy, Vanessa. Wellington Industries didn't exist 15 years ago. I built it from nothing, starting with a small technology consulting firm that I ran out of a rented garage. This revelation surprised her. Everything about Marcus, his clothes, his car, his obvious comfort with luxury, suggested he'd been born into privilege. My father was a factory worker, Marcus continued. My mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. They sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had. When I was 25, I lost them both in a house fire. The insurance money barely covered the funeral costs. Vanessa felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't expected this successful businessman to share such personal pain. I spent 2 years homeless myself, Marcus said quietly, living in shelters, sleeping in my car when I could afford the gas, taking whatever work I could find. I know what it's like to be invisible, to have people look through you as if you don't exist. How did you turn it around? Vanessa asked, genuinely curious. Someone gave me a chance, an older gentleman named Robert Hayes, who owned a small tech company. He needed someone to handle data entry, and he was willing to overlook my circumstances in favor of my potential. He taught me the business, became my mentor, and when he retired, he sold me the company for a fraction of what it was worth. Marcus stood again, walking to a briefcase that sat on the room's elegant desk. He withdrew a folder and returned to Vanessa. Robert Hayes taught me that success isn't just about making money, he said, handing her the folder. It's about creating opportunities for others. This is my way of honoring his memory. Vanessa opened the folder and gasped. Inside was a detailed employment contract, outlining a salary that was more than she'd ever dreamed of earning, comprehensive health insurance, and benefits that included housing and childcare assistance. This is too much, she whispered, staring at the numbers on the page. It's fair compensation for a demanding position, Marcus corrected. You'd be on call essentially 24 hours a day, managing not just my professional schedule, but my personal life as well. You'd coordinate with lawyers, accountants, travel agents, domestic staff, and business associates. You'd need to be discreet, professional, and completely trustworthy. Vanessa continued reading, her amazement growing with each detail. The position included a private apartment in Marcus's downtown penthouse building, a car for business use, and a generous childcare allowance. "What about Emma?" she asked. "You said you travel frequently. What happens to her when you're away?" "The building where you'd live has an excellent daycare facility. When I travel, you'd have the option to bring Emma along. I maintain residences in several cities, or to remain in Chicago if you prefer." Vanessa looked over at her sleeping daughter, trying to imagine a life where Emma would have stability, health care, and educational opportunities. It seemed like a fantasy, too perfect to be real. "There's something else," Marcus said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "The position would require absolute confidentiality. You'd have access to sensitive business information, personal details about my life, and financial data that could be valuable to competitors or the press. I'd need your word that nothing you learn would ever be shared with anyone." "Of course," Vanessa said immediately. "I would never violate your trust." Marcus nodded, seeming satisfied with her response. "I know you wouldn't. I'm a good judge of character, and I can see your integrity." A thought occurred to Vanessa, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "I don't have appropriate clothes for this kind of position. I don't even have a proper address to put on employment forms." "Those are practical issues that can be easily resolved," Marcus replied. "Tomorrow, if you accept the position, we'll handle all the logistics. New wardrobe, temporary housing until your permanent apartment is ready, documentation, everything you need to start fresh." Vanessa felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. 3 hours ago, she'd been huddled in the rain with a hungry baby, facing another night in an abandoned warehouse. Now she was being offered a chance at a completely new life. "Why me?" she asked again. "Surely you could find someone with experience, references, a stable background." Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "Because you've already proven yourself under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. You've shown courage, resourcefulness, and unwavering dedication to your daughter. Those qualities can't be taught or faked." He paused, then added, "And because I believe that people who faced real hardship make the most loyal employees. You understand the value of opportunity in a way that someone who's never struggled cannot." Vanessa looked down at the contract again, her mind racing through the implications. Accepting this offer would mean leaving behind the identity she'd carried for months, that of a homeless woman fighting to survive. It would mean trusting this relative stranger with her future and Emma's welfare. "I need to ask you something," she said, meeting Marcus's eyes directly. "Is this offer legitimate? Are you really offering me this position because you believe I can do the job? Or is this some kind of charity that you'll regret tomorrow?" Marcus's expression grew serious. "I don't make charity offerings, Vanessa. I make business decisions. This is a business decision. I need someone I can trust completely, someone who understands loyalty and discretion. Based on what I've observed tonight, I believe you're that person." "What if I'm not?" Vanessa asked. "What if I disappoint you? What if I'm not capable of handling this level of responsibility?" "Then we'll address those issues as they arise," Marcus replied. "But I don't think that will be necessary. You've been managing impossible circumstances for months. Managing my schedule and household will be demanding, but it won't be impossible." Vanessa stood and walked to Emma's crib, looking down at her sleeping daughter. Emma's tiny chest rose and fell peacefully, and for the first time in months, she looked completely content. The warm room, the full belly, the safety of their surroundings had given her daughter something Vanessa had been unable to provide: true rest. "When would I start?" Vanessa asked, still looking at Emma. "Immediately, if you accept. Tomorrow morning we'll begin the transition process. You'll shadow me for the first week, learning the routine and meeting the key people in my life. By the end of the month, you'll be fully integrated into the position." Vanessa turned back to Marcus, decision crystallizing in her mind. "What about references, Background checks. Surely you can't hire someone without proper vetting. I'll handle all of that, Marcus assured her. I have resources that can verify your identity, employment history, and any other relevant information. But I've already made my decision based on what matters most: your character. The magnitude of trust he was placing in her was almost overwhelming. This man, who barely knew her, was offering to entrust her with access to his most private affairs, his home, his professional life. There's one more thing, Marcus said, standing to face her. This position comes with significant responsibility, but also significant opportunity. I'll expect you to grow into the role, to develop skills that will serve you long term. I'll provide training, education, whatever you need to succeed, not just in this position, but in building a future for yourself and Emma. Vanessa felt tears threatening again. The offer was more than just employment. It was a chance at the kind of life she'd only dreamed of providing for her daughter. I accept, she said quietly, then repeated it more firmly. I accept your offer, Marcus smiled, the first truly warm expression she'd seen from him all evening. Welcome to Wellington Industries, Vanessa. I think this is going to be the beginning of something very positive for both of us. As they shook hands, sealing the agreement that would change both their lives, Vanessa felt a mixture of excitement and terror. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, taking on responsibilities she'd never imagined, and trusting her future to a man she'd met by accident. But as she looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib, she knew she'd made the right choice. For the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow instead of dreading it. What neither of them knew was that this moment of hope and new beginnings was about to become much more complicated than either had anticipated. The next morning arrived with the kind of Chicago sunshine that made the previous night's storm seem like a distant memory. Vanessa woke to the sound of Emma's cheerful babbling and the unfamiliar sensation of having slept on actual Egyptian cotton sheets. For a moment, she lay still, wondering if the entire evening had been an elaborate dream born of desperation and exhaustion. Then she saw the employment contract on the nightstand, Marcus's business card beside it, and reality settled over her. Like a warm blanket, this was real. Her life had fundamentally changed in the span of a few hours. Emma was wide awake in her crib, playing with her fingers and making the happy sounds that indicated she was well fed and comfortable. The transformation in her daughter was remarkable. Gone was the fretful, hungry baby of yesterday, replaced by the bright, curious infant Vanessa remembered from better times. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Torres," came a polite voice from the hallway. "Mr. Wellington asked me to let you know that breakfast has been arranged and he'll meet with you at 9 o'clock to begin your orientation." Vanessa glanced at the bedside clock, 7:30 a.m. She had 90 minutes to prepare for her first day in a world she knew nothing about. The irony wasn't lost on her that 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been finding Emma's next meal, and now she was worrying about making a good impression in corporate America. The hotel staff had provided a selection of professional clothing overnight, all in her size. Vanessa wondered how they'd managed such accuracy until she remembered Marcus's comment about his resources. Apparently, those resources extended to determining a stranger's measurements and clothing preferences with remarkable precision. She, dressed carefully in a charcoal grey suit that fit better than anything she'd ever owned, then fed and changed Emma before placing her in the high-end stroller that had appeared along with the other baby supplies. Looking at herself in the mirror, Vanessa barely recognized the professional-looking woman staring back at her. At exactly 9 o'clock, Marcus knocked on her door. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, his dark hair still damp from his morning shower carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. But his smile was warm and genuine as he greeted her. "Good morning, Vanessa. You look very professional." His eyes moved to Emma, who was gurgling happily in her stroller. "And how's our youngest team member this morning?" "She slept through the night for the first time in weeks," Vanessa replied, still amazed by the transformation. "I think she likes luxury accommodations." "Smart girl. She has excellent taste." Marcus gestured toward the elevator. "Shall we begin your introduction to Wellington Industries?" The ride down to the parking garage was filled with Marcus's explanation of their schedule. They would start at his corporate headquarters, where she'd meet his current assistant and begin learning the systems. From there, they'd visit his penthouse apartment, her future home, and then handle the practical matters of setting up her new identity as a Wellington Industries employee. "One thing I should mention," Marcus said as they approached his Mercedes, the same car where this all began. "The media occasionally takes interest in my personal life. As my assistant, you'll need to be prepared for that scrutiny. Nothing invasive, but business journalists sometimes photograph people entering and leaving our building." Vanessa felt a flutter of anxiety. "Should I be concerned about that?" "Not at all, but it's something to be aware of. Discretion and professionalism are always important, but especially when there might be cameras present." Wellington Industries occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper that seemed to pierce the morning sky. The lobby was a study in modern elegance, with flowing water features and abstract art that probably cost more than most people's houses. Employees moved through the space with purpose and confidence, their designer clothes and expensive accessories, marking them as members of Chicago's business elite. Vanessa felt distinctly out of place, despite her new professional attire. Everyone here belonged to a world she'd only observed from the outside, and she wondered if her humble background would be immediately obvious to these polished professionals. Marcus seemed to sense her nervousness. "Remember, you've already proven you can handle pressure," he said quietly as they entered the elevator. "This is just a different kind of pressure." The executive floor was a realm of quiet efficiency and understated luxury. Marcus's corner office commanded spectacular views of Lake Michigan, and the reception area outside was managed by a woman in her 50s who radiated competence and authority. "Vanessa, I'd like you to meet Patricia Hoffman, my current assistant." "Patricia, this is Vanessa Torres, who'll be taking over your responsibilities when you retire next month." Patricia rose from her desk with a warm smile that immediately put Vanessa at ease. She was elegantly dressed but approachable, with silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "It's wonderful to meet you, dear," Patricia said, extending her hand. "Marcus told me he'd found someone special, but he didn't mention you'd be bringing such a charming colleague." She was looking at Emma, who was staring around the office with wide eyes, taking in the impressive surroundings with infant curiosity. "Emma's going to be part of our team," Marcus explained. "We'll need to ensure the transition accommodates her needs as well." What followed was perhaps the most surreal morning of Vanessa's life. Patricia guided her through the intricate systems that kept Marcus's professional and personal life running smoothly. There were multiple calendars to coordinate, travel arrangements that required knowledge of his preferences in everything from airline seats to hotel amenities, and a complex network of contacts that included everyone from Fortune 500 CEOs to his dry cleaner. "The key is anticipating his needs before he expresses them," Patricia explained, as she demonstrated the sophisticated scheduling software. "Marcus is brilliant, but he's also incredibly busy. Your job is to eliminate friction from his daily routine so he can focus on the big picture." Vanessa absorbed information like a sponge, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions. The complexity was overwhelming, but she found herself energized by the challenge rather than intimidated by it. "You're a natural at this," Patricia observed as Vanessa successfully navigated a mock scheduling conflict that involved rearranging meetings in 3 different cities. "I can see why Marcus chose you." By lunchtime, Vanessa's head was spinning. With information about vendor relationships, security protocols, and the dozens of small details that kept Marcus's world functioning seamlessly. But she was also beginning to understand the scope of his business empire and the remarkable success he'd built from nothing. Marcus returned from his morning meetings to find Vanessa and Patricia deep in discussion about international travel protocols, with Emma napping peacefully in her stroller beside them. "How's our new team member doing?" he asked Patricia. "She's exceptional," Patricia replied without hesitation. "Quick learner, asks the right questions, and she has excellent instincts about priorities. You've made an excellent choice." Marcus looked pleased, but not surprised. "I told you I was a good judge of character." They spent the afternoon visiting Marcus's penthouse apartment, which would become Vanessa's new home. Located in one of Chicago's most exclusive buildings, the apartment was a masterpiece of modern design and luxury amenities. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and every detail spoke of wealth and sophisticated taste. "Your apartment will be on the floor below," Marcus explained as they toured the spacious rooms. "Same layout, but obviously you'll decorate it to your own preferences. The building's daycare center is on the 3rd floor, and there's a private entrance from the parking garage for convenience." Vanessa found herself speechless as she took in the grandeur of her future home. The apartment Marcus was providing was larger and more luxurious than anywhere she'd ever imagined living, let alone with a view that captured the entire Lake Michigan shoreline. "The building has full security," Marcus continued, "concierge service, and a domestic staff that handles cleaning and maintenance. You'll never have to worry about the basic necessities." As the afternoon progressed, they handled the practical aspects of Vanessa's transformation. Marcus's resources proved to be a team of professionals who specialized in creating new identities for corporate executives who needed to maintain privacy. Within hours, Vanessa had new identification documents, credit cards, and all the paperwork necessary to establish herself as a legitimate member of Chicago's business community. "Is this all legal?" Vanessa asked as she watched documents being prepared with remarkable efficiency. "Completely," Marcus assured her. "These are the same services we provide for executives who need to relocate quickly for security reasons, or who require privacy protection. Everything is properly documented and filed with the appropriate authorities." The final stop of the day was an upscale boutique where a personal shopper helped Vanessa select a complete professional wardrobe. The experience was surreal, trying on clothes that cost more than she used to make in months, being treated with the kind of deference usually reserved for wealthy clients, watching Marcus casually approve purchases that represented more money than she'd ever imagined spending on clothing. "This is too much," Vanessa protested as the bills mounted into the thousands of dollars. "It's a business investment," Marcus replied matter-of-factly. "You'll be representing Wellington Industries at high-level meetings and social functions. Your appearance reflects on the company." By evening, Vanessa felt like she was living someone else's life. She was staying in a luxury hotel, wearing designer clothes, and had just accepted a position that would provide financial security beyond her wildest dreams. But underneath the excitement was a nagging sense that this transformation was too good to be true. That evening, as she fed Emma in their hotel suite, Marcus joined them for dinner. The day's activities had been business-focused, but now, in the quiet of the elegant room, Vanessa found herself studying this man who had become her unlikely savior. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said, as Emma finished her bottle and Settled into sleepy contentment, of course. Why aren't you married? I mean, someone in your position, with your success. It seems like you'd have people lined up to share this life with you. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, swirling the wine in his glass as he considered the question. I was engaged once, he said finally. A woman named Rebecca Sterling. She came from the same social circle I moved into when Wellington Industries became successful. Vanessa sensed there was more to the story, and she waited patiently for him to continue. I thought she loved me, Marcus continued, his voice carrying a note of old pain. It turned out she loved my bank account and social status. When I discovered she was sharing confidential business information with her ex-boyfriend, who happened to be a competitor, I realized how naive I'd been. That must have been devastating. It was educational, Marcus replied, but Vanessa could see the hurt that still lingered in his eyes. It taught me the value of finding people who knew me before I had money, or who have their own reasons for being trustworthy. The implication of his words wasn't lost on Vanessa. He was trusting her because of her circumstances, because she had nothing to gain by betraying him and everything to lose. Is that why you really hired me? She asked quietly. Because I'm desperate enough to be loyal? Marcus met her eyes directly. I hired you because you've proven your character under impossible circumstances. The loyalty isn't born of desperation, Vanessa. It's born of integrity. There's a difference. As they sat in comfortable silence, Emma sleeping peacefully between them, Vanessa felt the weight of the trust Marcus was placing in her. Tomorrow, she would officially begin her new life, leaving behind everything she'd known for a world of privilege and responsibility she was only beginning to understand. What she didn't know was that Rebecca Sterling had been watching Marcus's activities with keen interest, and news of his new assistant was about to reach some very dangerous ears. 3 weeks into her new position, Vanessa had settled into a rhythm that still felt surreal. Her apartment in Marcus's building was everything he'd promised. Spacious, elegantly furnished, and equipped with everything Emma could need. The building's daycare had become Emma's second home, staffed by professionals who treated her daughter with the kind of attention Vanessa had only dreamed of providing. The work itself was demanding but invigorating. Patricia had been an excellent teacher, and Vanessa discovered she had a natural aptitude for the complex juggling act that kept Marcus's life organized. She successfully coordinated a merger negotiation involving executives from 4 different countries, managed a crisis when Marcus's private jet was grounded due to mechanical issues, and even handled a delicate situation involving a business partner's messy divorce. Marcus had been nothing but professional and supportive, never making her feel inadequate, despite her lack of formal business education. He'd arranged for her to take evening classes in business administration and corporate communications, investments in her future that went far beyond the requirements of her position. This particular Thursday morning began like any other. Vanessa arrived at the office at 7 o'clock, reviewed Marcus's schedule, and began the daily ritual of confirming appointments and handling correspondence. Emma was happily settled in daycare, charming the staff with her increasingly social personality and rapid development. At 8:30, Marcus emerged from his office looking unusually tense. Vanessa had learned to read his moods, and something was clearly bothering him. "Good morning," she said, handing him his usual coffee. Black, no sugar, from the specific Ethiopian blend he preferred. "You're 9 o'clock with the Henderson Group." "Confirmed. And I moved your lunch with Senator Morrison to 1:30 to accommodate the traffic from the courthouse." "Thank you," Marcus replied, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city with an expression Vanessa had never seen before, a mixture of anger and resignation. "Is everything all right?" she asked carefully. Marcus turned away from the window, his jaw set in a hard line. Rebecca Sterling is in Chicago. The name hit Vanessa like a physical blow. In the 3 weeks since Marcus had told her about his former fiancée, Rebecca had become a shadowy figure in Vanessa's imagination, the woman who'd betrayed Marcus's trust and broken his heart. She'd assumed Rebecca was safely in the past, a painful lesson learned, but no longer a threat. "Is that problematic?" Vanessa asked, though Marcus's expression had already answered her question. "Rebecca never does anything without a reason," Marcus replied grimly, "and she never comes to Chicago unless she wants something from me." Before Vanessa could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something instinctive made her answer with unusual caution. "Marcus Wellington's office, Vanessa speaking." "Well, well," came a smooth female voice that somehow managed to sound both elegant and predatory. "So you're the new assistant I've been hearing about." Vanessa felt her stomach drop. "May I ask who's calling?" "Rebecca Sterling. I think Marcus has mentioned me. I'd like to schedule a meeting with him, today if possible." "Mr. Wellington's schedule is quite full today," Vanessa replied, falling back on the professional protocols Patricia had taught her. "I'd be happy to check his availability for next week." Rebecca's laugh was like glass breaking. "Oh, sweetie, I don't think you understand. Marcus will want to see me today. Tell him I'm at the Fairmont Hotel, Presidential Suite. He knows the number." The line went dead, leaving Vanessa staring at the phone with a growing sense of dread. She looked up to find Marcus watching her with keen attention. "That was her, wasn't it?" he said. Vanessa nodded, relaying the brief conversation. Marcus's expression grew darker with each detail. "She's staying at the Fairmont," he mused. "Presidential Suite, that's interesting. Why is that significant?" "Because Rebecca doesn't have that kind of money anymore. Her family's fortune evaporated in bad investments 3 years ago. Someone is funding her trip to Chicago, and I doubt it's for sentimental reasons." Marcus returned to his office, and Vanessa could hear him making phone calls in low, urgent tones. She tried to focus on her work, but anxiety gnawed at her. Rebecca's call had felt like a threat, though she couldn't articulate exactly why. An hour later, Marcus emerged with his coat and briefcase. "I'm going to see Rebecca," he announced. "Cancel my 10 o'clock and tell the Henderson group we'll need to reschedule for tomorrow." "Should I come with you?" Vanessa asked, surprising herself with the offer. Marcus paused, studying her face. "This isn't business, Vanessa. It's personal. You said to yourself that Rebecca never does anything without a reason. If she's here to cause problems for Wellington Industries, then it becomes my business too." Marcus considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right, and you should see what we're dealing with. But I want you to understand, Rebecca Sterling is dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with physical threats. She's smart, manipulative, and she knows exactly how to find people's weaknesses." 20 minutes later, they were standing outside the Presidential Suite at the Fairmont Hotel. Vanessa had changed into one of her most professional outfits, armor for a battle she didn't fully understand. Marcus knocked once, and the door opened. Immediately, as if Rebecca had been waiting just inside. Vanessa's first glimpse of Rebecca Sterling was like looking at everything she wasn't. Rebecca was stunning in the way that only money and breeding could create. Tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless elegance that came from generations of privilege. Her clothes were obviously designer, her jewelry understated but expensive, and she moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "Marcus," Rebecca said, her voice warm as honey, but with an undertone that made Vanessa's skin crawl. "You look wonderful. Success suits you." "Rebecca." Marcus's tone was carefully neutral. "You wanted to see me." Rebecca's gaze shifted to Vanessa. And for a moment, those pale blue eyes seemed to catalogue every detail, her clothes, her posture, her obvious discomfort in this situation. "And you must be the assistant," Rebecca said, her smile never wavering. "Vanessa, isn't it? How refreshing." There was something in the way she said refreshing that felt like an insult wrapped in politeness. Vanessa straightened her shoulders and met Rebecca's gaze directly. "Miss Sterling," she replied evenly. Rebecca gestured them into the suite, which was even more luxurious than Marcus's apartment. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and champagne chilled in a silver bucket beside the window. Everything was perfect, arranged to impress and intimidate. "Please sit," Rebecca said, settling gracefully into an antique chair that seemed designed to showcase her elegant posture. "Can I offer you anything? The hotel's champagne selection is quite impressive." "This isn't a social call, Rebecca," Marcus said, remaining standing. "What do you want?" Rebecca's smile faltered slightly, revealing a harder expression underneath. "Straight to business, then. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You always lacked social graces." "I learned to focus on what matters," Marcus replied. "Now answer my question." Rebecca stood and walked to the window, her movements calculated to draw attention to her graceful figure. "I represent certain investors who are very interested in Wellington Industries." "Wellington Industries isn't for sale. Everything is for sale, Marcus. It's just a matter of price." Rebecca turned back to face them, and now her expression was purely business. "My associates are prepared to make an offer that would be difficult to refuse." Vanessa felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't a simple business proposition. It felt like a threat. "Who are these associates?" Marcus asked. "People with resources far beyond what you might imagine. International investors who see the potential in your technology, patents, and manufacturing capabilities." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You mean corporate raiders who want to strip Wellington Industries for parts? I mean visionaries who could take your little company global," Rebecca snapped, her polite facade cracking. "You've done well, Marcus, but you're thinking too small. These people could make you richer than you've ever dreamed." "I'm not interested." Rebecca's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly composed herself. "Perhaps you should consider the alternative." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Vanessa found herself moving slightly closer to Marcus, though she wasn't sure what protection she could offer against whatever Rebecca was implying. "Are you threatening me, Rebecca?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to cooperate willingly rather than being forced to cooperate later." Rebecca's smile returned, but now it looked predatory. "My associates are very persuasive when they need to be." Marcus stood abruptly. "We're done here." "Oh, but we're not," Rebecca said, her voice taking on a silky quality that somehow sounded more dangerous than her earlier threats. "You see, I've done my research on your new assistant. Fascinating story, really. A homeless woman with a baby, rescued from the streets by the generous CEO. Very touching." Vanessa felt her blood turn to ice. Rebecca's smile widened as she saw the fear in Vanessa's eyes. "I wonder what the business community would think if they knew the full story. A man of your position, bringing an unknown woman into his home, giving her access to confidential information. People might question your judgment. They might wonder about your motivations." "Leave Vanessa out of this," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "But she's so central to the story," Rebecca continued, clearly enjoying their discomfort. "A single mother, desperate, vulnerable. It would be easy to suggest that perhaps your relationship isn't as professional as it appears." Vanessa found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "That's not true." "Truth is irrelevant." "Dear," Rebecca replied with false sweetness, "perception is what matters, and I can shape perception very effectively when I need to." Marcus stepped forward, his control finally cracking. "If you try to hurt Vanessa or Emma, I'll destroy you." "Such passion," Rebecca observed with obvious amusement. "How interesting. I was wondering if you'd developed feelings for your little charity case." The room fell silent except for the sound of traffic far below. Vanessa realized she was holding her breath, caught between Marcus's protective anger and Rebecca's calculated malice. "I want an answer by tomorrow," Rebecca said, returning to her chair as if the confrontation had never happened. "Cooperate with my associate's offer or face the consequences of refusing. And Marcus, those consequences won't just affect you anymore." As they left the hotel, Vanessa felt like she was walking through a nightmare. In less than an hour, her new life had been transformed from a dream into a potential disaster. Rebecca Sterling had made it clear that she was willing to destroy innocent people to get what she wanted, and Vanessa and Emma were now squarely in her crosshairs. "I'm sorry," Marcus said as they reached his car. "I never intended for you to become involved in this." "What are we going to do?" Vanessa asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Marcus's expression was grim as he started the engine. "We're going to fight back, but first I need to tell you exactly who we're dealing with, because Rebecca Sterling just made the biggest mistake of her life. She threatened my family." The word family hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither was quite ready to acknowledge, but that would change everything about the battle they were about to face. The drive back to Wellington Industries took place in heavy silence, both Marcus and Vanessa processing the magnitude of Rebecca's threats. The Chicago skyline that had once symbolized hope and opportunity for Vanessa now felt ominous, as if every building might be hiding enemies ready to tear down the new life she'd barely begun to build. Marcus pulled into his reserved parking space and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved to get out. The familiar underground garage felt like a sanctuary compared to the hostile territory they'd just left. "I need to know everything," Vanessa said finally, breaking the silence. "If I'm going to be targeted because of my association with you, I deserve to know exactly what we're facing." Marcus studied her face in the dim light of the garage. "Rebecca's associates aren't just corporate raiders, Vanessa. They're backed by an international consortium that specializes in hostile takeovers of technology companies. They identify businesses with valuable patents or manufacturing capabilities, then use any means necessary to acquire them. Any means necessary? Financial pressure, legal manipulation, public relations campaigns, blackmail, whatever works. They've destroyed dozens of companies and hundreds of lives in the process." Marcus's voice carried a weight of knowledge that chilled Vanessa. 3 years ago, they targeted Rebecca's family business. When her father refused to sell, they orchestrated a systematic campaign that resulted in bankruptcy, divorce, and ultimately his suicide. Vanessa felt sick. And now she's working for them? Survival makes people do terrible things. Rebecca lost everything: her family's fortune, her social status, her sense of identity. When these people offered her a way to rebuild her life, by helping them acquire other companies, she took it. But why Wellington Industries? Why you? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring through the windshield at the concrete wall ahead of them. "Because I have something they can't buy or steal. The trust of my employees, the loyalty of my clients, and a reputation for integrity. Companies like mine are harder to destroy from the outside, so they need someone on the inside to create the necessary chaos. Someone like Rebecca, who knows your personal history and weaknesses." "Exactly. And now they know about you and Emma. They'll use whatever leverage they can find." Vanessa felt a familiar knot of fear in her stomach, the same feeling she'd carried during those months on the streets, when every decision could mean the difference between survival and disaster. "Maybe I should resign, if my presence here puts you and the company at risk." "No." Marcus's voice was firm, brooking no argument. Running won't solve this problem, and I won't let them win by making you sacrifice everything you've worked for." "Then what do we do?" Marcus finally looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a fierce determination mixed with something deeper, more personal. "We expose them. Rebecca and her associates operate in shadows, using fear and secrecy as weapons, but they're not as untouchable as they think." Over the next 6 hours, Marcus's office transformed into a war room. He made calls to contacts Vanessa didn't know existed, former FBI agents who'd gone into private security, investigative journalists who specialized in corporate corruption, lawyers who fought financial crimes on an international scale. The network of people willing to help Marcus was impressive, speaking to the reputation for integrity Rebecca had tried to use against him. Patricia had returned from her planned retirement temporarily, her decades of experience with Marcus's business, making her invaluable in the current crisis. She worked alongside Vanessa to coordinate with Marcus's security team while simultaneously maintaining the facade of normal business operations. "The key is documentation," Patricia explained as she reviewed financial records that might reveal connections between Rebecca's consortium and other failed companies. "These people are smart, but they're also arrogant. Somewhere in their history, there's evidence of their methods." By evening, a clearer picture had emerged. Rebecca's associates were part of a group called Meridian Capital, which presented itself as a legitimate investment firm, but operated more like an organized crime syndicate. They'd acquired over 30 technology companies in the past 5 years, always following the same pattern: identify the target, find personal leverage against key decision-makers, then force a sale at far below market value. "The good news," said James Morrison, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who'd arrived that afternoon, "is that their pattern makes them predictable. The bad news is that they're very good at what they do. They've never been successfully prosecuted because they're careful to stay within legal boundaries, even when their methods are ethically reprehensible." As the team worked late into the night, Vanessa found herself thinking about Emma, safe in the building's daycare under extra security. The irony wasn't lost on her that her daughter was probably safer now than she'd been during those months. On the streets, despite being targeted by international criminals. Around midnight, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Rebecca's number. "Speakerphone," James advised. "We need to document this conversation," Marcus answered, his voice carefully neutral. "Rebecca, I hope you've had time to consider my offer." Rebecca's voice filled the room, smooth and confident. "My associates are eager for your decision." "I've given it considerable thought," Marcus replied, "and my answer is no." Rebecca's laugh was cold. "I was afraid you'd say that. It's a shame, really. Vanessa seems like such a sweet girl, and little Emma is absolutely precious. It would be tragic if anything happened to disrupt their new life." Vanessa felt her blood turn to ice, but Marcus's expression remained calm. "Is that a threat, Rebecca?" "It's a reality check. You're not the only one with resources, Marcus. My associates have been quite thorough in their research. Did you know that Vanessa's ex-boyfriend, Tyler Morrison, is facing drug trafficking charges in California? Interesting coincidence, don't you think?" Vanessa gasped. Tyler Morrison, Emma's father, the man who'd abandoned them when she announced her pregnancy. She hadn't heard from him since Emma was born, had no idea what he'd been doing or where he was living. "What does Tyler have to do with anything?" Marcus asked, though his eyes were on Vanessa, concern evident in his expression. "Oh, he's been quite cooperative since my associates reached out to him. Amazing what people will say when they're facing serious prison time. Tyler has some very interesting stories about Vanessa's past, drug use, questionable activities, concerns about her fitness as a mother." "That's not true," Vanessa whispered, but Rebecca continued as if she hadn't spoken. Of course, Tyler's credibility might be questionable given his current legal troubles, but combined with the right kind of media attention about your unusual hiring practices, it could create quite a scandal. Child services might even get involved, especially if there were questions about Emma's living situation. The threat hit Vanessa like a physical blow. Everything Rebecca was describing was false, but she knew how easy it would be to create doubt, to make her look like an unfit mother who'd manipulated a wealthy man for personal gain. "You have until tomorrow. At noon," Rebecca continued. "Accept our offer or watch everything you've built crumble. And Marcus, don't think you can protect your little family forever. We have resources you can't imagine." The line went dead, leaving the room in heavy silence. James Morrison was the first to speak. "She just made several prosecutable threats. We have her on tape threatening to fabricate evidence and manipulate government agencies. Will that be enough to stop them?" Vanessa asked, her voice barely steady. "It's a start," James replied, "but we need to move fast. If they're threatening to involve child services, they might already have plans in motion." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the city. "James, I want round-the-clock security on Vanessa and Emma. Patricia, contact our legal team and have them prepare injunctions against any media outlets Meridian might approach. And get me a meeting with Senator Morrison. His committee oversees financial crimes legislation." What about Tyler?" Vanessa asked quietly. The thought of Emma's father being used as a weapon against her was almost unbearable. "We'll deal with Tyler," Marcus said firmly. "James, I want everything you can find on his current situation. If Meridian is manipulating his legal troubles, there might be evidence of witness tampering or obstruction of justice." The next morning brought a whirlwind of activity. Marcus's security team had worked through the night, and by dawn they'd uncovered connections between Meridian Capital and Tyler's arrest that suggested the timing wasn't coincidental. More importantly, they'd found evidence that Meridian had been using similar tactics against other companies, including documented cases of false evidence and manufactured scandals. At 10 o'clock, an hour before Rebecca's deadline, Marcus called a press conference. Vanessa watched from his office as he addressed a room full of business reporters, financial journalists, and news cameras. "Wellington Industries has recently become aware of an attempted corporate extortion scheme," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that had built his business empire. "A group calling itself Meridian Capital has threatened our company, our employees, and their families, unless we agree to sell our business at below market value." He went on to detail the evidence they'd gathered, presenting a clear picture of Meridian's methods and their history of destroying companies through manipulation and intimidation. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other business leaders came forward with similar stories. Journalists began investigating Meridian's other acquisitions, and law enforcement agencies opened formal investigations. Rebecca's phone call came at exactly noon, but this time her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "You have no idea what you've done," she said, the smooth charm replaced by barely controlled rage. "I've exposed criminals," Marcus replied simply. "It's what any decent person would do. This isn't over. My associates don't forget, and they don't forgive. Your associates are about to be very busy with federal investigators," Marcus said. "I suggest you consider cooperating with the authorities rather than continuing to threaten innocent people." The line went dead, and this time Vanessa knew it was truly over. 3 months later, Vanessa stood in the same office where her new life had begun, but everything had changed. Meridian Capital was facing federal charges in multiple jurisdictions, their assets frozen and their operations shut down. Rebecca Sterling had disappeared, probably fleeing to a country without extradition treaties, but several of her associates were in custody. Tyler Morrison had indeed been arrested on drug charges, but not through Meridian's manipulation. His legal troubles were entirely of his own making, and his attempts to implicate Vanessa had been quickly dismissed when investigators realized he was being coached by Meridian's operatives. The charges against Meridian will probably take years to fully prosecute, James Morrison had told them the previous week. But their business model is finished. Word has spread through the international business community, and their tactics are now well known. They'll never be able to operate effectively again. Marcus entered the office, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the relaxed expression that had become more common since the crisis ended. The past 3 months had changed their relationship in ways neither had expected. The professional boundaries that had defined their interactions had gradually given way to something deeper, built on trust, shared adversity, and genuine affection. "How's Emma this morning?" he asked, handing Vanessa her coffee. "Happy. She took her first steps yesterday, and now she thinks she's ready to run the company." Marcus laughed, a sound that never failed to warm Vanessa's heart. "She's probably overqualified for most of our middle management positions." They worked together in comfortable silence for a while, handling the routine business that kept Wellington Industries running smoothly. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air, a sense that something important was about to happen. Finally, Marcus set down his pen and looked at her directly. "Vanessa, I have something I need to ask." "You?" She looked up from her computer, noting the unusual seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Marcus stood and walked around the desk, stopping directly in front of her chair. "The past 6 months have been the most challenging and the most rewarding of my life. Not because of the business successes or the crisis we faced, but because of you and Emma." Vanessa felt her heart begin to race. "Marcus, let me finish," he said gently. "When I found you in my car that night, I thought I was helping someone in need. What I didn't realize was that you were the one helping me. You brought warmth and purpose into my life that I didn't even know was missing." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, dropping to one knee beside her chair. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat. "I love you, Vanessa Torres. I love your strength, your intelligence, your devotion to Emma, and the way you've made my house feel like a home. I love the person I am when I'm with you, and I can't imagine my life without you and Emma in it." He opened the box, revealing a ring that caught the morning light in brilliant flashes. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be the father Emma deserves and the husband you both deserve?" Tears were streaming down Vanessa's face as she looked at this man who had transformed her life in ways she'd never imagined possible. 6 months ago, she'd been desperate and homeless, fighting just to survive. Now, she was being offered everything she'd ever dreamed of by a man who truly understood her value. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, of course, yes." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood to kiss her with a passion that spoke of months of restrained feelings, finally set free. When they broke apart, both were laughing through their tears. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, reaching into his other pocket. "This is for Emma." He handed Vanessa a legal document that made her gasp. It was a petition for adoption, already signed by Marcus, waiting only for her approval. "I want to be her father in every way that matters," he explained. "Not because I have to, but because I want to, because she's already stolen my heart, just like her mother did." Vanessa looked at the document through tear-blurred eyes, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. A desperate decision to seek shelter in a stranger's car had led to a love story neither of them could have imagined. "She's going to be so excited," Vanessa said, signing the adoption papers with a trembling hand. "She already calls you Daddy when she thinks no one is listening." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise and delight. "She does? She does? I think she's known. We were a family before we did. As they stood together in the office where Vanessa had first learned to dream again, looking out at the city that had nearly destroyed her but ultimately gave her everything, she realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most desperate moments. Emma chose that moment to escape from the daycare, toddling into the office on unsteady legs and launching herself at Marcus with complete trust that he would catch her. As he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around while she giggled with pure joy, Vanessa knew that her daughter would never know what it felt like to be unwanted or unloved. 6 months later, at their wedding, Marcus would tell the gathered guests that he'd thought he was rescuing a woman and her baby from the rain. But the truth, he'd say, was that they had rescued him. They'd shown him that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or business acquisitions, but in the love of people who chose to stay not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And when little Emma toddled down the aisle as their flower girl, scattering petals with the serious concentration that only a toddler could muster, everyone would agree that some families are born from love at first sight, while others are born from love at first choice. The Wellington family was definitely the latter, and they were perfect exactly as they were. As Vanessa had learned that rainy night in Chicago, sometimes the best things in life come from the most desperate gambles. Sometimes a moment of fear and desperation can lead to a lifetime of love and security. And sometimes getting into the wrong car at exactly the right moment can take you exactly where you were meant to be all along. The woman who had once been homeless with a hungry baby was now Mrs. Marcus Wellington, mother to a thriving toddler and partner in building an empire based on integrity and compassion. It was proof that no matter how dark the storm, no matter how desperate the circumstances, love could still find a way to light the path home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.